Uncertainty is a two-edged sword, as it were. It's always creating opportunities. You are better at imagining the future. You can make a lot of money. But also, it's a downside if you go too far in that direction, or if you are wrong, which you can always be. It can be the end of your career.
Our traders are heavily influenced in it, of course, because they have to deal with it every single day.
Don't get over-excited. Don't get overconfident. Protect your downside, and then from that, take risk.
If you could inject one thing in the mindset of a BrightFunded trader in terms of uncertainty, risk, what would you inject?
You have to take risk. Without risk, nothing happens. The first thing you always need to ask yourself is, are there risks that I don't want to take at all?
Welcome to another very special BrightFunded interview. Today we sit down with Siep, our CEO and co-founder. Siep, welcome to the interview.
Thank you.
And with Lex. Lex is one of our advisors at BrightFunded in the fields of uncertainty. So first of all, Lex, welcome to the interview.
Thank you very much, and pleasure to be here.
Definitely. We're actually very grateful to have you here and to have you also on our advisory board, because we already received plenty of very good advice that helped us as BrightFunded to greater heights. So we're not only happy to have you on our advisory board, but also today in the interview. It's a very nice occasion to introduce you to our community, to our traders, and to also show your incredible experience and working career. So without further ado, Lex, I think you have a very, very incredible career already behind you. Can you tell a little bit about who you are as a Lex Hoogduin?
Yes, so I'm Lex Hoogduin. I'm 68 years old, Dutch, economist by profession, married to Audrey, my wife. Together we live in Naarden, a place close to Amsterdam in the Netherlands. I'm a curious person. I'm a competitive person. I'm cooperative and resilient. That's basically who I am. I'm a lover of sports, soccer and American sports in particular. Have played soccer quite some time, but mainly watching nowadays. And that's certainly true for the other two sports that I mentioned. And I love reading.
Nice. Did you play, by the way, high level of soccer?
No, not a very high level, amateur level. At that time, the highest that I played was second class.
Okay, that's pretty
so
decent.
It's not that bad, but it's certainly not close to a professional career.
No, it's pretty decent in the Netherlands, second class. I think we also played football when we were young. And I think second class is pretty decent in the Netherlands.
It's not bad.
Definitely not. And Lex, if especially regarding your working career, if like someone would ask you what you really do for a profession, what would you say?
Yeah, that's a good question. I have to think a little bit about it. I have to put it concisely, but basically it is analyzing, trying to understand economic and societal developments. Teaching about that, advising people on that in that area, and take decisions, actions.
Yeah,
in that field.
Nice. Very nice. And talking about advice, because you've also been an advisor of Wim Duisenberg, which was the president of the European Central Bank. To me, it's very interesting. Actually, the first time I heard that from you and I saw that on your curriculum, it's of course it seems like a very interesting job. Can you explain a little bit about what you really did as the advisor of the president of the European Central Bank?
Yeah, this was a fascinating time, so I can talk about that for hours, even days.
Take the time.
So I went there with him in the run-up to the ECB, the last year before the ECB was really established and the euro was introduced. And as you said, I was his advisor, but it was not just advising on monetary policy and economics, but it was helping to really set up the organization. There was an organization in the run-up to the ECB that was called the European Monetary Institute, which was basically kind of a project organization. And we had to turn that organization with around 300 people into a full-fledged, modern, big in the sense of providing the currency for a large area, a central bank, so that not only involved thinking about monetary policy, but also thinking about communication, but also how you recruit people, all kinds of things that come with setting up an organization, and the accounting system and whatever, setting up a workers' union, allowing that. And so that was fascinating, and I was very close to Wim Duisenberg in that period, could advise him on everything. And that was it was a exciting time. Also because he was a very special person. I learned a lot about leadership. In the central banking world, you had the president of the central bank, the leader of the central bank, most of the time is what is seen as the most clever guy in the organization, and is not primarily selected on leadership. But Wim Duisenberg, he was an economist. He was a good economist, but he would not say that he was the brightest of all. And it was also not what interested him. He was a real leader, and what interested him was action, getting things done, and he was not interested in details, which sometimes hindered him, but also greatly helped him. And so I learned a lot for working for such a person, which I could try to apply later in my own life.
Interesting.
And he was also, I think that's also part of the whole thing. He was a very characteristic person, an enormous sense of humor. So we've laughed a lot there.
Which is also very important.
Which is important. If you cannot laugh, well, then in the end,
definitely,
life is not so pretty.
And when was this role as the advisor of Wim Duisenberg? When was it in your career? Was it already at the start of your career, or a bit in? No.
It was somewhat later in my career. So I went to Frankfurt, where the ECB was established in 1997. So I graduated in 1998. So I was already 17 years into my career. I done my PhD at that point in time. I had joined DNB in 1980 as an economist, the economics department. Rejoined in 1988 and had become first deputy head of the economics department, and then the head of that department. And from that position, I went to Frankfurt. So I had already a management position at DNB.
Nederlandse Bank.
The Dutch Central Bank. The Nederlandse Bank, DNB, abbreviated. And so it was not in the start of my career.
But I think all the experience you gained during that period with Wim Duisenberg, you also took with like the roles that you had after that, for example, at the London Stock Exchange and all the other roles. Yeah,
absolutely. So when I returned from Frankfurt in 2001, I returned to the Dutch Central Bank again, and I initially became head of the research department. And I had asked that central bank if I were to return, which was not certain at the time that I joined the ECB. I had said, well, if I return, then there are two things that I might find interesting to do. One is the financial markets department at the Dutch Central Bank, and the other is the research department, because I had the feeling that at the research department I could really achieve some progress in the way that department functions. So at a certain point they called me. So there was not a kind of an end of my career at the ECB. They called me and said, well, you had said that you would like to be head of the research department at some point. That there's a vacancy now, so if you say yes, the job is yours. You get a kind of deputy director position at the Dutch central bank. It's one level higher than the level that I had when I went to Frankfurt. So one step below the executive board level. So I did, and so I could already in that position benefit indeed from my experience in Frankfurt. But 1.5 years or so into that role, then something happened that was really important for the further development of my career and for myself as a person, because at that point the Dutch central bank merged with the pension and insurance supervisor to consolidate all supervision in the Dutch central bank. And that was a large project. And I was asked to lead that project, to be the project, overall project manager with 35 or so sub-projects. And that not only was merging the two institutions, but it came with a reorganization to make the central bank flatter. There was quite some hierarchy in the organizations, like you see in many central banks, flatter, and also do a cost-cutting operation. And that was completely new to the Dutch central bank, I think, perhaps also to central banks more generally. So we had to save 15% of costs or something like that, and we could not rule out that people had to be fired. And so this was unique to the Dutch central bank. You have to be aware that there were people that were at the Dutch central bank almost from the cradle to the grave, and also that there were quite some people who had a kind of a family position at the Dutch central bank. Not that was formally established, but that the father, the son also worked at the central bank, or the daughter also worked at the central bank. So it came as a shock. That's what I explained it to people, that the Dutch central bank could fire people in the reorganization. Why was this so important for my career? This was the first time that I really had to manage something and to lead something where I was not the expert myself. In economics, given my own background, I most of the time I pretended that I knew the answer if the question was asked. Here I had to do with integrating IT systems, dealing with the Works Council, people that were angry, concerned, and so on and so forth. So here I could not micromanage, and there I could use the experience that I had gained in Frankfurt, how Wim Duisenberg managed things and how he was very well able to delegate to people, to trust people, say, okay, I've selected you as a person that has to do this. I trust you. Go ahead.
Interesting. It's also nice that experience you gained during that period, you could really use to the later period at the Dutch central bank. Definitely interesting. And I'm sure that you have already had a very, very long career, and especially also thinking about uncertainty. Was it always like the red line in your career, like thinking about uncertainty and advising on uncertainty on economic level?
No, it became that in 1983. So it's long ago.
Yeah.
So it was relatively early in my career, but it didn't start at the university. It didn't start at the Dutch central bank, but it started in 1983 when I got a call from a good lifelong friend of mine who was at the university and said, well, there is a PhD position available in Groningen at the University of Groningen in the Netherlands. And you said in the past that you would be interested in doing a PhD, here's a possibility to do it. And so the topic was uncertainty and monetary economics. And I had no clue on what uncertainty was and how deeply it influenced the economy. But from that point onwards, that has been the main theme of my thinking, of my career, of my development, because it's not that you all of a sudden develop a very different perspective on things. That has been a process that I could say is not yet fully finalized.
I think never.
At this stage, and
No, especially today.
that will continue. But there has been a strong development in that ever since.
Definitely, and I think it's also interesting for our listeners and our community. If you could explain uncertainty to, for example, an 18-year-old retail trader, how would you do that?
Yeah, that's a quite a challenge. But basically, uncertainty has to do with lack of knowledge about what will happen in the future, and that's something that cannot be eliminated. That exists. That's part of what we call the human condition. The future is uncertain. You cannot know exactly what will happen in the future, and that comes in different varieties. The first one is that if you do something, you do not know what will happen, but you can imagine the different possibilities that there are, and that's, for instance, if you flip a coin, then you cannot know in advance if it's a fair coin, whether it will be heads or tails, but it's one of the two. And so the uncertainty then is reflected in that you have more than one possibility. More technically, you can, in such a situation, you can have probability distributions, you can then calculate, you can make estimates, but you never can eliminate the fact that there are more possible outcomes. But there's a deeper variety, and that's more important, is that you cannot even know all the possible outcomes. You cannot even know all the possible outcomes. And then you cannot calculate. And and that you call fundamental uncertainty. So the fact that if you know all the possible outcomes, that's a situation of risk, and then you can calculate. And that's very powerful. We have there's a lot of risk management tools, but they have a limit because sometimes you cannot know all the possible outcomes, and that's where I have focused on. So it is important for this 18-year-old trader that he or she is aware that there is never certainty. There can always happen things that you cannot know.
That you cannot foresee, definitely.
Yeah.
And from the moment you really started to investigating like uncertainty within the economy, which was like the most uncertain period from the moment you started thinking about uncertainty until today?
Yeah, I think it is difficult to measure uncertainty in the sense that I just discussed. If you have risk, then you can say, well, there's a lot of, what were the times there was the most volatility? And then you come up with the usual suspects, fall of the Berlin Wall, the Great Financial Crisis, 2007, 2008, the COVID period. But as said, the deeper uncertainty, as it were, the fundamental uncertainty, that's always there, showed its face mostly around the fall of the Berlin Wall, the end of the USSR. And I must say that the current period is perhaps the most uncertain period that I have experienced.
Yeah, interesting. We're actually living in interesting times, especially also
like the Chinese say.
yeah. Also, our traders are heavily influenced in it, of course, because they have to deal with it every single day. And we've already had a one-on-one conversation about it, about the complete situation with the new president in the USA, of course. What would you advise to, again, the 18-year-old trader that is, for example, trading at BrightFunded or trading at another firm? What would you advise him or her to navigate through the current level of uncertainty?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is that don't get overexcited in both directions. And in both directions, I mean the upside that may be there, because uncertainty is a two-edged sword, as it were. It's always creating opportunities. If you are better at imagining the future, you can make a lot of money. But also, there is a downside if you go too far in that direction, or if you are wrong, which you can always be, it can be the end of your career. So be always. Don't get overexcited. Don't get overconfident that you know in which direction it will go. So protect your downside, and then from that take risk, because without risk taking you cannot make any money. But there's no free lunch. As said, in an environment of uncertainty, you can always be wrong.
Definitely. I think especially the first part, that you always have to protect your risk, and if from like the fundamental base of protecting your risk, then you can take exposure or like
it's
risk.
like in soccer.
Exactly.
Like in soccer, I think as a coach in soccer, first of all you need to be clear that your defense is in order, and then from the defense, if your defense is in order, you can
Play the midfield.
You can safely attack.
Yeah.
And here in finance, it is that you have to be aware that there are what are called sometimes uncle points, and these are points where you will get out of business, you go bankrupt, and so on and so forth. So you have to protect that, and you should be aware that some risk you rather not. Rather not take, and this, of course, is the difficulty. Is it if you have had successes in the past, that you again become overconfident and go too far in taking risk, thinking that you can, so that you thinking that you can manage the world and manage the outcomes because you were successful in the past.
Yeah. Definitely. But I'm sure this, like the situation we're talking about, is also a very hot topic on all the advisory boards, but also other boards that you are currently at the moment.
Yes, absolutely. It is what they then call. So at the moment, what is the major situation is that we are in a period where, let's say, the geopolitical situation is shifting. We are in a gradual process where China, in particular, will gain in importance. And there is a geopolitical battle, for the moment still in parentheses, as it were, but between China and the United States. And that shakes the international financial and economic order that was established after the Second World War, with a global governance, certainly after the fall of the Berlin Wall, and that order is now being challenged, and that changes the rules of the game, and changes certain things that you could trust now no longer may be trusted, probably. And then there enters a new president in the United States who very forcefully tries to move in a certain direction. So yes, this is a major theme everywhere where I'm on boards, and you can be sure also in central banks at the moment, of course, also in governance more.
Yeah, 100%. I think in every financial institution that has something to do with anything financial, which is obvious for a financial institution, of course, it is a major topic. And I'm pretty sure that like this period for you is also a very busy period in terms of providing your opinion on this topic.
Yeah, it is absolutely, and again, you cannot. Given my uncertainty theme, it is important that you cannot forecast, you cannot predict in which direction it will go. But you can try to imagine, and you always have to think in terms of scenarios, what might happen, and then basically, I advise to basically think in 3 types of scenario. A kind of base scenario, what you think at the moment is the direction we are moving in. And then a kind of a upside scenario, where you think about what might happen, which gives me new opportunities, that I call an upside scenario, and a kind of a downside scenario. What could, in the worst case that you can imagine, a plausible worst case, what could happen, and so that latter scenario is basically for helping you to think about how to get your resilience in order, how to get your defense in order, how you can ensure that you will not, in this very turbulent environment, will go under, and allowing you to monitor, to see, to be alert to where the opportunities are, and so seeing whether there are possibilities from moving from the scenario that you are on, the base scenario, as it were, to the upside scenario.
Yeah, and many people say, in such a trade war there are only losers. Do you still think that, given the approach that the US is taking, there's still a best move, for example, for Europe or China, and how is that being determined?
Yeah, I agree with those who say that there are only losers in a trade war. That is absolutely true. We know that from the past, in the 1930s. So that is true. But thinking you cannot, as an individual trader, you cannot really influence that perspective. That's more for the politicians. But you can think about where the spots are to benefit even from, let's say, in itself negative developments. That's an aspect that we call being anti-fragile. And that's a term that comes from Nicholas Taleb. But basically, in simple terms, it is trying to benefit from negative developments, from stress, and to gain from stress, to become better after a crisis. Never waste a good crisis is a saying. Mm-hmm. That's basically the type of attitude that you need to have as a trader. And in financial terms, what you need to do in situations where you foresee a lot of volatility, that is that you create optionality. It's not by accident that Nicholas Taleb was an options trader, and that led him to think about how to gain from things that become stronger after turbulence. And that's in an option. If you have an option, if you have a lot of volatility, you pay a fixed price, but you gain. So you have a small cost with the potential that you gain a lot if there's a lot of volatility. and you hit the strike price, as it were. So, and you have to generalize that thinking to deal well with potential adverse effects, and to think about how can I benefit from this. So the first thing, as I mentioned earlier, is to be resilient. Be sure that you are not killed by high volatility, but this goes beyond it. Say, also look at possibilities to gain from it. And so that's the basic advice.
Yeah, thanks for that. Also, I think a very good advice for BrightFunded traders, not only BrightFunded traders, but basically all the traders. So thanks for that, Alex. And like talking about like your positions at on either an advisory board or like the original board at like the major financial institutions you've had. What is usually a thing regarding uncertainty you see, but people in the organization often miss?
Well, I two things. I think one that I already mentioned. I think overconfidence. That builds easily if you are doing well. Yeah. That's the first thing. But the second thing is, I also mentioned it already a little bit, is lack of imagination. Not being able to imagine that some things can happen that haven't happened in the past or happened long ago. Just an example, if you look at the financial crisis of 2008, and you ask yourself, why could it happen? And then it is lack of imagination. At that time, you had the U.S., what was he at the time? Minister of Finance, I think, Timothy Geithner, was very much involved in the financial crisis. He wrote I think 600 pages volume. I think it was called Stress Test or something like that, where he analyzed what had happened. And I think you can save a lot of time by just looking at the conclusion, which is lack of imagination. Other things showing that I returned at that time at the Dutch Central Bank. I was not in supervision there when the crisis struck. I was at Robeco, a Dutch asset manager. So I talked a lot informally with the people who did the supervision, and asked them how could you have missed this? And they said, we had such a long period of stability before that happened. We could not imagine that a Dutch bank could fail. Certainly not a large Dutch bank could fail. They couldn't imagine that would happen, and then it happens, and so that's how crises develop. And so lack of imagination, think in the scenarios, be always aware that something can happen that affects you very negatively, but also something that didn't happen before in that strength.
Yeah, great. I think it's definitely extremely important also for us as a company to include that into our operations, definitely. And a little bit about right now, Lex, because you are already advising BrightFunded from the get-go since our launch in September 2023. I've reached out to you because I know you have a very impressive working career and thus experience. So I've reached out to you to advise us in the field of uncertainty, risk, which is until now actually very, very happy, actually grateful for us and very helpful for us. That's what I wanted to say. Very helpful to run BrightFunded. Curious, what made you eventually say yes to join BrightFunded's advisory board?
Yeah, basically I think two things: curiosity. Really curiosity of what you intended to do. And secondly, your entrepreneurial spirit. You are real entrepreneurs in my view, young people who really take action, and for me, 68 year still new digital world, and I was extremely curious how you would create a community, because I had, in one of the many activities that I did, had tried to do that myself in the past and failed. So I was curious, how are young people going to do that, and have the entrepreneurial spirit and act, think, but they not leave it at thinking but acting. So basically the entrepreneurial spirit that I found in both of you.
Yeah, thanks. Actually, we're, as I said, also extremely grateful for the advice you've already given together with Willem. For us, it's very helpful that we can always reach out to someone who already walked partially the path that we'd like to walk and have the experience within the financial industry. So yeah, thanks for that, definitely. And I think in this interview also our community already has gotten a very great insight about who you are, Lex, and about what you did, which is very, very impressive. But to finalize and to wrap up today's interview, I'd like to ask you one more question about if you could inject one thing in the mindset of a BrightFunded trader in terms of uncertainty, risk. What would you inject into their physiology or their mindset?
Yeah, basically summarizing what we discussed. So use your imagination. Always look both for the upside and the downside, and act on it.
And that's it.
Don't sit still.
That's it.
Yeah. Don't sit still, but always protect your capital and also protect the downside.
Yeah, and I think perhaps, but that's a little bit going beyond your question. But don't in the most important thing perhaps in risk management, or the first question that you should always ask in taking risk, and you have to take risk if you are an entrepreneur or if you have a company. Without risk, nothing happens. So then you can better go to the graveyard. That's ultimate stability. But the first thing you always need to ask yourself is, are there risks that I don't want to take at all? And that's related to the resilience question. But the thinking about resilience starts with, are there risks that I don't want to take at all? For instance, if you are offered to play a Russian roulette game for 20 times, and you get a very high reward if you survive these 20 times. Are you prepared to do that, given the probability that after the first shot you're dead, you're out? Don't take, unless you have a very high risk appetite, but be aware that it can be over after one round. If you don't want to do that, then just don't enter the game. That's and that's more generally the case. That's the first question that you have to answer.
Yeah, I think it's a great one, and also a great one to wrap up the interview.
Definitely, I think we could fill more than 2 hours.
Oh yeah, 100%. But we'll leave it like this today. I'm pretty sure there will be definitely a part 2. But Lex, I want to thank you for today's interview. I think the community and our traders are gotten a very great insight about who you are and what you already did. So I want to thank you for today's interview. We'll have a little lunch together with Willem after this one to discuss BrightFunded in a more general way. Siep, thank you as well for today. Listeners, I want to thank you as well. I'm very sure that you will love this interview and you also love the advice and the insights of Lex. So I want to thank you for today, and we see each other at the next one.